The sea was restless that night, its surface cloaked in a dense fog that seemed to swallow the moonlight whole. Tomio, a young fisherman from the isolated coastal village of Kurosaki, rowed his small boat through the oppressive silence, the only sound the rhythmic creak of oars against the water. The village elders had always warned against fishing under such heavy mists, whispering tales of ancient gods that stirred in the deep when the world turned blind. But Tomio, stubborn and weary of superstition, paid no heed. His nets had been empty for weeks, and hunger gnawed at his resolve. As he cast his net into the inky depths, something heavy tugged back, not the frantic pull of a fish, but a slow, deliberate weight, as if the ocean itself resisted letting go. His heart quickened. He hauled the net aboard, muscles straining, until a strange object broke the surface. It was a stone mask, its surface encrusted with fossilized algae and etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim lantern light. The mask's features were disturbingly perfect, a broad forehead, hollowed cheeks, and eyes carved so deeply they seemed to stare back. Tomio's breath caught. It wasn't just a relic. It felt alive, humming faintly with a vibration that crawled up his arms like a pulse. He should have thrown it back. Every instinct screamed for him to cast it into the abyss. But something about the mask held him. Its flawless symmetry, its eerie familiarity, like a face he'd seen in forgotten dreams. Wrapping it in an old cloth, he rowed back to shore, the fog parting just enough to reveal the jagged cliffs of Kurosaki. The village slept under a shroud of quiet unease, its wooden houses huddled against the wind. Tomio carried the mask to his small home, a cramped shack filled with the scent of salt and fish. He placed it on a table, its carved eyes catching the flicker of his oil lamp. The humming grew louder, a low drone that seemed to whisper words just beyond comprehension. That night, Tomio's sleep was fractured by a vision. He stood on a shore of black sand, the sky above a void of swirling stars. From the ocean rose a colossal face, vast as a mountain, its features mirroring the mask's, but infinitely more alien. Its eyes were twin voids, pulling at his soul, and its mouth moved as if to speak truths no human could bear. Tomio woke, gasping, his face slick with sweat. The room was silent, but the mask seemed to loom larger in the darkness, its carved spirals glinting like wet ink. By morning, the unease lingered. Tomio stood before his cracked mirror, studying his reflection. His eyes seemed wrong, deeper, somehow, as if they stretched into caverns within his skull. He blinked, and for a fleeting moment, faint spiral patterns traced across his cheeks, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. He rubbed his face, heart pounding, and dismissed it as exhaustion. But the mask called to him. He sat before it, tracing its symbols with trembling fingers. They weren't static. They shifted under his gaze, curling into spirals that seemed to spiral inward forever. His head throbbed, the humming now a constant presence, like a song from the edge of the universe. Desperate for answers, Tomio sought out Old Man Hiroshi, the village's unofficial keeper of lore. Hiroshi's home was a clutter of ancient scrolls and fishing nets, his eyes clouded with age but sharp with memory. Tomio unwrapped the mask, and Hiroshi recoiled, his wrinkled hands trembling. "You fool," he rasped. "That's no mere relic. It's tied to the old stories, the face that must not be seen." He spoke of a deity older than the earth, a being whose gaze unraveled minds, whose fragments brought ruin to those who dared claim them. "Return to the sea," Hiroshi urged, "before it sees you." Tomio laughed it off, though his voice wavered. Superstition, he told himself. Just old tales to scare children. But as he walked home, the mask tucked under his arm, the village felt different. The wind carried a low hum, and the faces of passers-by seemed off, their eyes lingering too long, their smiles too sharp. Back in his shack, Tomio couldn't resist the mask's pull. He stared into its hollow eyes, and the spirals on its surface seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. His reflection in a nearby window flickered, his skin crawling with faint, geometric lines that twisted into impossible shapes. Days passed, and the mask consumed his thoughts. He barely ate, barely slept. The humming grew louder, weaving into his dreams, where the colossal face now spoke in a language of screams and stars. He began sketching the masks, symbols obsessively, filling pages with spirals that seemed to bleed off the paper. His face in the mirror grew stranger, his jawline sharper, his eyes sinking deeper, as if his flesh were reshaping to echo the mask's perfection. One night, he woke to find his fingertips tracing spirals on his cheeks, unbidden, the skin warm and pulsing. In a panic, Tomio turned to the village's crumbling library, a damp room filled with moldy books and diaries of long-dead fishermen. Buried in a dusty journal, he found a passage that chilled him, a tale of a forgotten cult that worshipped a Rasto de Deus, a cosmic entity whose face was a gateway to truths that shattered sanity. The mask, it said, was a shard of its being, a lure for the curious and the damned. Tomio's hands shook as he read, the words blurring as the humming filled his skull. He looked up, and for a moment, the room seemed to twist, the walls curling into spirals that mirrored the mask's design. As he stumbled home, the village was quiet, but the air felt heavy, as if the sea itself were watching. The mask sat on his table, its carved eyes glinting with something like intent. Tomio's reflection now showed undeniable changes. His skin bore faint, spiraling scars, and his eyes glowed with a depth that wasn't human. He wanted to destroy the mask, to hurl it into the sea, but his hands wouldn't obey. Instead, he sat before it, whispering its symbols, as the humming grew into a chorus that promised revelations too vast and too terrible for his mind to hold. The village of Kurizaki awoke under a sky bruised with unnatural hues, streaks of violet and gray swirling, as if the heavens themselves were unraveling. Tomio barely noticed. His nights were now a kaleidoscope of nightmares, each one dominated by the colossal face from the sea, its eyes pulling him toward a void where stars screamed. The stone mask sat in his shack, its humming a constant presence, burrowing into his skull like a parasite. His reflection had become a stranger's. His eyes sank deeper, glinting with an unnatural depth, and faint spirals traced his cheeks, pulsing faintly under his skin. He scratched at them until blood welled, but the patterns only grew sharper, as if mocking his resistance. Tomio's days blurred into a haze of obsession. He avoided the village, fearing the stares of neighbors who seemed to sense something wrong. But the curse was no longer his alone. Yumi, a weaver who lived near the cliffs, came to him one morning, her face pale and her hands trembling. She spoke of a dream, a vast face rising from the ocean, its gaze stripping her soul bare. When she lifted her scarf, Tomio froze. Her skin was splitting along her jaw, curling into spirals that mirrored those on his own face. "I saw it after you showed me that thing," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's in my head now." Tomio's stomach churned. The mask, still wrapped in cloth on his table, seemed to hum louder, as if pleased. Word spread through Kurizaki like wildfire. Fishermen whispered of strange shapes in the fog, faces forming in the waves. Children drew spirals in the dirt, giggling until their parents saw and wept. Then came the first true victim. Kenji, a burly dock worker, staggered into the village square one evening, clawing at his face. His eyes had inverted, the pupils sinking inward as if pulled into his skull. He screamed of seeing the other side, a place where the world was a speck in an endless void. Before anyone could restrain him, he gouged at his face, blood pooling in patterns that glittered like constellations. The villagers locked him in a shed, but his screams echoed through the night, each one laced with words no one could or wanted to understand. Tomio, driven by guilt and dread, returned to the village library, tearing through its moldy tomes. A brittle diary, penned by a long-dead priest, spoke of the Rasto de Deus, a being older than time whose fragments, like the mask, were conduits to its will. To gaze upon it was to invite a revelatio absoluta, a truth so vast it shattered the mind, reshaping flesh to reflect its cosmic design. Tomio's hands shook as he read, the spirals on his skin burning. He glanced at a cracked window, and his reflection showed a face no longer fully his. His jaw had elongated, his mouth twitching into an unnatural curve, as if trying to mimic the mask's perfection. The village descended into quiet panic. More fell to the curse. A fisherman's wife woke with her mouth split into a gaping maw, whispering in voices that weren't hers. A child's face sprouted smaller faces, each one frozen in a silent scream. The afflicted began to gather at night, drawn to the shore, where they carved spirals into the sand and muttered of a coming revelation. Tomio watched from a distance, horrified, as their flesh twisted, some slicing their skin to align with the god's design, their blood forming patterns that glowed faintly under the moon. The mask's humming grew unbearable, a chorus of voices now, urging him to join them. Desperate, Tomio tried to destroy the mask. He smashed it with a hammer, but the stone refused to crack, its surface rippling as if alive. In retaliation, his face contorted further, his nose flattened, his eyes stretched, and spirals burrowed deeper into his flesh, forming layers of smaller faces that pulsed with their own life. He screamed, collapsing as visions flooded his mind. Endless dimensions, galaxies collapsing, and the colossal face watching it all with indifference. The truth clawed at him. The universe was a fleeting illusion, humanity a speck in its infinite apathy. His sanity frayed, but he clung to one thought. He had brought this upon Kurizaki. By the week's end, the village was a shadow of itself. Neighbors barricaded their doors, but the curse seeped through. Yumi, now barely recognizable, her face a writhing mass of spirals, found Tomio and begged him to end it. "It's not just us," she rasped, her voice layered with others. "It's spreading. It sees everyone." Her eyes, now voids, reflected a sky where stars twisted into spirals. Tomio fled to his shack, the mask waiting like a judge. He could no longer tell where his thoughts ended and its whispers began. The humming promised answers, but each one carved away another piece of his humanity, leaving him teetering on the edge of a revelation he feared would consume him entirely. The storm came without warning, a tempest that tore through Kurizaki with the fury of a god awakened. The sky churned with clouds that spiraled like the patterns etched into Tomio's flesh, and the sea roared, its waves crashing in rhythmic pulses that echoed the mask's relentless hum. Tomio staggered through the village, his face no longer his own, a grotesque parody of the stone relic, with eyes sunken into abyssal pits and spirals carving his skin into a living mosaic. The mask, still intact despite his futile attempts to destroy it, seemed to pulse in his shack, its whispers now a cacophony of voices promising truths too vast for his crumbling mind. The air was thick with salt and dread, as if the ocean itself was rising to claim what it had birthed. Tomio's dreams had bled into reality. Each night, the colossal face from his visions grew clearer, its features an infinite array of faces, each one a testament to civilizations long erased from the cosmos. He could no longer close his eyes without seeing it. Its gaze stripped away the illusion of his existence, revealing a universe indifferent to human suffering. Now, driven by compulsion he could neither resist nor understand, Tomio stumbled toward the shore. The village was a graveyard of sanity. Houses stood empty, their windows reflecting spirals that shimmered like wet ink. The afflicted had gathered on the cliffs, their bodies contorted into shapes that defied nature. Limbs fused, faces sprouting faces, each one whispering in a language of stars and voids. The sea churned violently, waves forming spirals that mirrored the patterns on Tomio's skin. Lightning cracked, illuminating a shape rising from the depths, the Rostro de Deus, vast and incomprehensible, a mass of writhing faces that spanned the horizon. Its eyes were black holes, its mouths gateways to dimensions where time dissolved. The villagers, now a grotesque collective, swayed as one, their voices merging into a hymn of agony and reverence. Tomio fell to his knees, his own face splitting further, smaller faces erupting from his cheeks, each one screaming truths he couldn't bear. The earth was a fleeting speck, humanity a momentary error in the cosmic tapestry. destined to be unwoven. Yumi, or what remained of her, approached him. Her face was a writhing chaos of spirals and mouths, each one chanting fragments of the same revelation. "It's not a curse," she rasped, her voice layered with countless others. "It's union." Her body began to dissolve, flesh melting into the collective mass of the villagers, who were now fusing into a single, pulsating entity, a grotesque amalgamation of faces that pulsed with the same rhythm as the sea. Tomio's vision blurred as his own body betrayed him, his arms twisting into spirals, his chest sprouting eyes that wept starlight. He tried to scream, but his mouth stretched into an abyss, echoing the entity's hymn. In a fleeting moment of clarity, Tomio remembered the priest's diary. The Rosto de Deus offered not destruction, but assimilation, a buntsau that erased individuality to merge all into its eternal whole. He fought to hold on to himself, to remember his name, his life, but the mass hum drowned out his thoughts. He staggered to the cliff's edge, the entity's gaze pulling at his soul. The sea parted, and the full form of the Rosto de Deus emerged, a cosmic horror of infinite faces, each one a record of a world consumed, a galaxy extinguished. Its presence crushed the air, bending reality until the sky itself spiraled inward, a vortex of stars and void. Tomio's final act of defiance was to close his eyes, but the visions persisted, endless dimensions collapsing, galaxies devoured, and the Rosto de Deus watching with cold indifference. His body unraveled, flesh merging with the collective mass of the villagers. Their faces, hundreds, thousands, screamed as one, their forms rising into the sky, a cloud of writhing, sentient flesh that glowed with the light of dying stars. The village was left desolate, its streets silent save for the faint hum that lingered in the air, a whisper of the entity's eternal presence. As the storm subsided, the sea grew calm, but the sky remained scarred with spirals. The mask, now alone on Tomio's table, pulsed faintly, its carved eyes glinting with a knowing malice. Far beyond Kurosaki, in distant cities, people would soon dream of a face in the stars, their reflections showing the first faint spirals. The Rosto de Deus had not finished. It had only begun to see.